Welcome back to another episode of the Angler Journey podcast. Today, we are tapping into an area of entrepreneurship that takes strategy, knowledge, brand, and the heart to put yourself out there. We're meeting with a gal who is sharing the truths of the fed cattle industry. She's an angler alum, advocate for agriculture, first-generation producer, and currently receiving her PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Let's get a good old Nebraska welcome to Miss Anna Kobza.
Thank you, Haley.
Thanks for being here today. Okay, so I remember the reason I had kind of got reconnected with you is because I saw your article, and I also saw you on Fox News. What was that like, the Fox News? How'd that get going? Yeah. How'd you get on that?
So I remember being a little nervous when a writer for Fox News had reached out to me, because that's a much bigger news source than anyone I've ever spoken with. And a lot of times they don't let you review things that they will write and publish beforehand. And so that kind of scared me a little bit, because I don't want anything I say to be taken out of context, you know?
Yeah.
So it was actually a girl that writes for Fox News, must have come upon my social media. And so she emailed me and asked if she could do an article on me. And, well, actually, it was two kind of separate articles she wanted to do. It was one about, someone had asked me a question when I put up question boxes in my stories about Yellowstone and my opinions on it. And so she was like, I liked your response, and I kind of wanted to ask you more about it. And so I was like, okay, sure. But then she was like, but then I wanted to do a second piece about just you and what you do. And I was like, okay, I'm more comfortable with that. Like, I'm not. So they did release a short article about what people in agriculture think about Yellowstone, but I was like, I'm really not into that so much. I was like, I really don't care that much to do this, but I will happily talk to you more about like my social media, because I'm very comfortable with that, obviously. So yeah, she just kind of discovered me on social media and decided she wanted to do a write-up on
That's interesting.
what I'm doing. Yeah.
I was curious, because I'm like, how'd you make that connection, and how that kind of bloomed and blossomed.
And I had my boyfriend Kane, he knows a guy who works in DC, and I was like, can you like fact check that this is a real person? And
no
she
kidding.
Was. So I was like, okay, it's legit.
Nerve-wracking. Seriously. Yeah. Someone taking that, they can twist the story anytime.
So I was a little nervous about it, but it turned out fine. So
cool. Well, I'm so happy to have you here today, and I'm glad we get to connect, because we both went to college together. You're an angler alum, and we're so happy to have you back in Nebraska, in the heartland. So give our audience a rundown of where you've been and what you've been doing lately.
So when I graduated from the University of Nebraska, I went down to Texas, to the Panhandle. Canyon, Texas is where I was, and that is where I decided I was going to get my master's. And so I was at West Texas A&M studying animal sciences, technically the degree that I was receiving, but obviously a major focus in feedlot nutrition. So I went down there, and that's a 2-year program. And so obviously my time priority-wise was on school and on finishing my master's, but I really started to, I think, really develop my social media presence a lot more in the last 2 years while I was down there. And I really started to dive into specifically the cattle feeding industry. And so I recently moved back just here in the end of December before Christmas, and started my PhD at the University of Nebraska. And so I'm also studying animal science with research focused in feedlot nutrition.
How's that been?
It's been really good. I really got thrown into the fire right away. So I was told that I wouldn't have a research project for a while when I came here. And the day after I got here, they said, oh, just kidding, we have a project that starts this weekend. So I have a metabolism trial going on right now, which is essentially a digestibility trial. With a small number of cattle, and then I have a follow-up trial this summer at the feed yard in Mead, Nebraska at our extension center, and so we'll have another trial immediately following that. So lots of research, which is great to kind of get that done and out of the way, but it's been good.
Yeah, cool. I love that. Describe a little bit of what you do outside of your PhD.
So I started my social media presence, which Instagram is my main platform. I do use Facebook a little bit, and I've done TikTok a little bit, but honestly,
but with the name change,
I know
I'm battling that right now with the band. I get it.
I know. So I'm like, I just have kind of stopped using TikTok so much. It's just a waste of my energy when my following is mainly on Instagram. So I started that, I think it was 2018, like my junior year of college-ish.
Yeah, sophomore, junior, yeah.
I remember being in build camp here in the Angler program, and at this point in the process, we were doing like validation, so we were making lots of phone calls or emails trying to validate that the problem we wanted to solve existed. And I remember being so frustrated by the end because I still have my notebooks with all the phone calls I made, and Haley, I made so many phone calls,
so much.
So many, and I was like, this problem exists that I wanted to solve, and that was that there was a lack of ag experiences or ag education for kids in all different types of communities, rural and urban. And I was like, this problem exists. I just don't know how to fix it, and I don't know how to monetize it. And so out of frustration, I started an Instagram page.
Yeah.
And originally it was supposed to just be a page that I thought was going to be consumer education, because I thought that's what the problem was and that's what needed fixed. And I would say it's evolved a lot since then, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. It's become less about consumer education and more about teaching my followers, which are predominantly tied to agriculture, how to communicate with that population of people. Because I think we do a pretty poor job of doing that in a good way. And so I think helping them learn how to discuss hard topics and have these conversations with consumers is really beneficial to them. And so and I can see the demographics of like the kind of people that follow me, but when I have done polls in my stories about like, do you work in agriculture? Are you tied to agriculture in some way? The vast majority of my followers do work in agriculture or involved in some way. And so it's not likely that I'm reaching that consumer audience that I thought I was. Really, it's sharing my own story and sharing how to have these hard conversations with consumers, with people who work in agriculture that don't have an online presence, you know? So
you do a fantastic job, and we're going to get into that of, you know, how to communicate with customers, and you've been through it, you know it. And man, I can't even imagine though. I totally see the problem you're facing, but I think young people nowadays, it's like, oh, I'm going to be an advocate for agriculture. That's amazing. I love that. But how? And what are you doing? And you're doing that. You're doing the research. So it's going to be cool. I'm excited to talk about this. Going back to Angler, one of my questions is, for those who don't know, outside of Angler, we create as a freshman, sophomore, your manifesto. And what that is you're really just creating your why and why you're here. So I want to talk about, what was your manifesto then and what is it now?
I think my manifesto has honestly not really changed. I think how I maybe approach it has changed a little bit. I remember my manifesto being, and I still have that video somewhere when we made it for Tom's class, but it was all about wanting to make a difference or make a change. And so I think that's still my manifesto today, and maybe perhaps making a change, what I want to make a change for is a little different. Back then it was more around consumer education, which I thought was what the problem was, and it still is an issue, but I think now, so my manifesto is more around changing the stigma around the cattle feeding industry specifically. I noticed that when I was getting into social media, that of all industries or all sectors of the agricultural industry, the cattle feeder was the least represented. And so my goal has been to represent them and fight for their futures and fight for my own future as someone who wants to work in that. And so kind of changing the stigma and the negative perception that consumers have around cattle feeding has kind of become where I want to make change.
It's a real thing. One of my questions later I want to talk about is, a lot of people in agriculture, it's really easy just to let the dust settle and wait till it
just put your nose to the grindstone and keep working. And I understand that, and I can relate to that, but also we have to stand up at some point too.
Right, I agree. I agree. Very cool. Next question I have pertaining to when you were an angler is, we created, or we wrote a letter to ourselves as freshmen. What letter would you write to yourself now, if you had to write one?
Writing one to myself now? I think it would be, I remember, like, just as someone just starting in that social media space and someone just a young person, an angler, I thought I knew so much, and I've realized just how much, even in just the last 2 years, once I got outside my comfort zone, just how little I knew and just how much I've learned. I've learned more about who I am and who I want to be in the last 2 years than I did in those 4 years in college. And I know that in 5 years, I'm going to look back and say the same thing to myself. So you're just going to continue to change and evolve, and that's a good thing. And that's not something you have to be scared or intimidated by. It's going to change, and that's probably for the best.
Yeah. What do you think? How have you changed since college, master's? Now you're at your PhD. How have you changed?
I think I had a very narrow perspective on, well, one, just agriculture in general, because I didn't grow up in agriculture. And so I was still very much learning a lot about the industry itself. And now I think I have a much better perspective and a very different point of view as to how things work. And not just the cattle feeding industry, but different sectors of the beef industry as well. Things are a lot more gray than they are black and white like they thought they were. And so I would say that my perspective on that and my approach to communication with consumers has changed greatly. It used to be more of a, tell people this is the way it is, tell them the facts. And now I realize that that kind of communication doesn't get through to the consumer. It really doesn't get through to anybody. It's about listening a lot first. I think that's a very undervalued communication skill, especially in agriculture. And so trying to implement that skill into my life is one of the biggest things that I've learned and evolved in.
Yeah. I think you feel like you've mastered communication when you get to college, and then once you graduate, it's like culture shock because you're not with your friends, you're not surrounded by all that energy, and you have to actually maintain intentional relationships, and that can be hard.
Yeah, it's easy when you have, I have just a sounding board with my following. It's easy when I can say things about agriculture and I have a sounding board of people that agree with me, that's easy to talk about. It's when you get resistance that it becomes really hard. And you have to really struggle through how to communicate with them. Yeah.
Would you say what's the percentage of resistance you face on your account?
It really depends. I would say it's mostly positive, but you do get a few bad apples in there, and even people that follow me. I don't know why they follow me if they don't enjoy my content, but I would say it's a very small percentage, really. And some of those that meet you with resistance want to have a conversation, and some of them don't. So you just have to know where to spend your time talking to those people, because you're not going to be able to reason with everyone.
For those who don't follow you on social, or maybe don't have social, what would you say is your strategy, or how are you communicating with your followers and your audience?
So I mainly post in the form of reels or hard posts, and then I use stories as well. I've probably been less active on my stories just because my life's changed a little bit since I was in Texas. I used to work at the feed yard daily, so that was where a lot of my story content came from. And now I'm doing a lot of research in the animal science building here at UNL and in the office a lot. So my life's just not as exciting now to put on my stories. But I really don't know that I have a particular philosophy as to how I choose what to post and when to post. I typically don't plan out content a ton. I'll write down ideas when I have them, but I kind of just do it in the moment and when I'm feeling it.
It is. I was rereading some of your posts today, and they are so well written. Who taught you that?
Yeah, I think that is a skill that I've definitely developed, and especially in the last couple years. And I don't know that I was really taught well how to write those kinds of things. I think I've learned from, my previous posts, which were maybe not written quite as well. I remember Kane, my boyfriend, telling me one time, "You write differently," is what he told me one time when I asked him to proofread some stuff. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means. But I think I've just learned over time how to maybe reach my audience on a more human level rather than this condescending, I know this and you don't kind of thing. So just trying to relate to them more. And also as a student in science, we're inundated with information and lots of scientific jargon that doesn't make sense to anyone else but us if you don't work in the industry. And so realizing that as someone who came into her master's unable to even interpret any of the information I was reading. I was like, no one can understand this, so someone has to be able to relate this information on a level that anyone can understand. And so I think being able to, in grad school, I developed that skill a little bit, how to break down that really complex scientific information to a level that everyone understands. Because it's not that they're not smart enough to understand. It's like there's a lot of jargon and lingo that if you don't work in it, why would you understand it?
Yeah,
you know?
you can't blame someone who has never known or trained or grew up with it. That's I think it's very easy for people like you and I who did grow up in production agriculture to get frustrated.
Very
lash
easy
out.
to say, like, why don't you understand this? It's like, well, why would they?
Yeah.
You know, you probably don't understand anything about their industry if they were to talk in lingo and jargon. So
Right. Cool. Okay, so as entrepreneurs, we're creatives, we're builders, and sometimes dreaming beyond what we think is possible. Now that you're in your PhD, how does your brain tick and operate? Is it different?
I would say it probably is. I do have a little bit of creativity in me. I mean, creating content does take creativity and a little bit of art, but I'm much more of a scientific thinker. I like facts and things that can be explained by science, you know, that's how I think. So really, I mean, science is what makes me tick. And I was having a conversation with my sister one day because she works in a completely different type of field. She works in like theater and art. And so her brain ticks in a very different way. It's a very creative and environment in her brain, and so we just tick on very different levels, and what makes us think and what drives that want and desire to learn, you know. So and grad school has been a big part of that as well, as in nurturing that desire for science and things that can be explained. You know,
that comes out in your content for sure. Like I can tell that in a really, really nice, pretty picture, not always a pretty picture, that there's science and there's intention behind the words that you put on there.
Yep, and that's also another thing, is I understand that not everyone else's brain ticks on that level that mine does, and so you have to break it down in a way that makes sense too, almost to an emotional level, sort of, I guess. But
how long does it take you to create that? Is it natural?
It's so like that's the thing. That's why I post like organically. And it's just like when things come to me and like I start writing, and I usually like will start writing and like it looks pretty bad, and then I'll start like, oh, this sounds better. And so like I just kind of rewrite things, and it doesn't like I typically will like be able to write stuff like throughout the day. I may leave it and come back to it when I have like a fresh mind again. But I usually, like, if I want to write a post, I'll write it that day. It doesn't take me super long, but it does take me going through things a few times, figure out a better way to say things, or reorganizing. Giving myself a couple drafts for that stuff for sure.
Okay, take us, let's go back to when you were coming up with this and you found the problem. How did you go about creating the Instagram account? And what was that like?
So that was when I think I started to really discover like what social media influencers were, or whatever you want to call them. I had followed a few, and they were always in like the fashion and like home renovation type space or whatever. And I remember it was like finals week of December 2018, I think. And I just was like, well, I'm just going to start an Instagram account, like separate from my personal one. I had a personal Instagram account. And honestly, I started the secondary account because I was like, I can't post this on my personal. People are going to think I'm weird. Like it was a scare factor, and the reason that I started an additional account. And I remember just starting it. I was like, well, I'll just post a picture, say what I'm going to do, follow people that I think, you know, are going to enjoy this, and let it go from there. And so I like looking back at like my first post and how like even just the aesthetic of my page has changed, and like the quality of not only copywriting but photos as well has changed. But really it was just, I just made a new account, and it went from there.
Yeah, because now like you have a significant amount of
Yeah.
followers, so it's really cool to see that.
Yeah.
I love that there's like a day that you realize I'm just going to start an
Yeah.
Instagram account, and that
Yep.
was the problem that you
Yep.
fixed. So that's really cool. The original intent was to cater towards high school and grade school, and that kind of took a turn.
Yeah.
Now you have a larger following. What does your audience look like now, and what challenges have you faced?
So that audience, it's predominantly female. I think it's like 60-40 female male in like the 20 to 30 range. And actually what I find the most interesting is I have followers that like to connect like often or engage in my content often from like all over the world. I know a vet in Ireland, like one in Australia, people
That's
in New
so
Zealand.
cool.
And so it's really cool to get to hear from them because they do things so differently where they're at. And obviously the way we do things is very different to them. So hearing from those people was really interesting and really good for me to kind of help expand my point of view and perspective to a more world base rather than just United States based, because it's very different. But I would say like over time, it stayed pretty consistent as far as male, female, and like that 20 to 30 range. I think it's people that relate to me maybe and work in the same field, and so like seeing that kind of validation online. But what was the other half of your question?
Like what? No, you're fine. You're fine. Maybe some challenges.
Some challenges.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely getting used to the negative comments or DMs was something I had to figure out how to handle. I think it's really easy to want to react. And like initially when I read those comments, you know, like I don't have a stone cold heart. Like those comments make me angry or sad or upset. And so I just kind of have to like let them be and let them sit for a while. And like I'll come back to them next day when I've got a clear head and I can respond with the same kindness that I would want to receive and try to engage in a conversation with them. And if they're not having it, then that's it. Like I just forget about it, you know? So there's been definitely some of that's been challenging, particularly when I talk about taboo topics, growth implants, antibiotics, that kind of thing. That's when I get the most negative backlash. And the only thing that I can support myself with is science, you know, and not everyone agrees with that. So definitely that has been a challenge. I think one of the other challenges that I've run into is sometimes you get creative blocks. You can just like all of a sudden forget like how to post content and you're like, I don't even know what to create. I don't know what
That's
people
when you
want.
do the fun stuff though, I feel like. And I can see that in your content. It's really cool.
You're like, I don't know what people want to see, and like you haven't been on your stories in a while, and so it kind of feels weird getting back on if you haven't been on in a while. But I think that's just kind of the ebb and flow of having an online presence. Sometimes you have the energy to be there and sometimes you don't. And I know that grad school is obviously a priority for me. So I know that account will be there when I get really busy if I want to come back. But so that's been kind of hard to balance as well, is that balance between, okay, yes, I have this social media account, but also I have a graduate degree that I'm trying to complete as well. So very different types of things I'm trying to do.
Right. I feel like a lot of people don't maybe understand that being a agricultural influencer is what I would consider. That is entrepreneurial in itself. Like you are running and managing an account, and that takes time.
Yeah, it does.
And energy. How do you stay excited about it? And what advice do you have for business owners out there that struggle to have the grit to keep going?
Yeah. You know, it's especially hard in the winter because I do like to go out and get my camera out and take photos, especially at the feed yard. And that's really hard to do in the winter and going into the spring because feed yards are very muddy, especially in Nebraska. And so it's really hard to want to post that kind of content online. But also just your minimal daylight hours can make it hard to want to create content too, because the only time I get to create that stuff is after everything else is done for the day, after work, after 5 p.m. And it's really hard to do that in the winter. And I think that's something all people who do social media can relate to, kind of that seasonal affective disorder. But I think it's okay to just have dry periods and like just have to be okay with that. I don't think you have to force content through those times where you're just not feeling it. I think just kind of let it be. Like your audience is going to be there when you come back, you know? Right. I've had people who I've connected with over social media, you see them kind of step away for a little while And then when I come back, it's like, oh, hey, they're back. Like, no one is angry at you for leaving or taking a break, you know. Social media can be really exhausting.
Oh my
Putting your
gosh.
life out there for everyone to criticize and have an opinion on.
It's wonderful when you're just the one scrolling, but it's hard
Yeah.
when you're the one actually
For sure.
behind the words.
I've had to accept
photos.
that. Like, I'm putting my life out there. There's going to be criticism and opinions that I didn't care to hear, but
yeah.
yeah.
How have you learned to cope with that?
I think you just have to let it roll off your back. I mean, those people know nothing about you personally other than what they see online, and you don't know anything about them. So you don't know where they're coming from. They really don't know where you're coming from. And you just gotta accept it and let it go. It's not worth wasting your time and energy over. Because I used to dwell on that stuff a lot. Like, oh, this person said this about me. It's like, they don't know you and you don't know them.
Yeah.
So you just gotta let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hard. So my next question, I was reading a post and you talked about in Texas, some of the FFA state officers, they were asking questions to the youth, which is amazing. I love, and I read that it's great that they're doing that, but is that the problem here?
Right.
You had a response that you wanted customers to trust and you wanted them to seek the truth about agriculture. What steps do you take in making sure that you're asking the right questions to your customers and answering those questions in the right way?
Our consumers are inundated with information on the internet, and some of it's bad and some of it's good. And so I think you have to, before you can provide them with any kind of scientific information, you have to just talk to them as a human being, human to human. Let's have a conversation. Let them know that you're willing to do that. And then you can start to talk science. And if they're willing to engage, that's great. But if not, that's totally fine. You just kind of let it go. But asking the right questions is kind of a challenge because I think differently and think on a different level and have a different perspective of our industry than our consumers do, or people who don't work in even the same industry or sector of the industry that I do. So it can be a challenge, but I don't know. I guess I don't really know if I know how to answer this.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Asking the right questions. Maybe you could take us back to when you were an angler and you were doing that customer discovery. What type of questions were you asking?
I remember, so I was calling extension agents, I was calling ag teachers and advisors in schools that had them, and then I was just calling teachers in schools in general, in Omaha schools and in any school really, and particularly in Nebraska. And I remember calling some outside, but I was particularly looking at Nebraska. And I was asking them point blank, getting to the point, do you have ag programs? And then I was asking them, why or why not? And what's the involvement if you do? And what benefit would you see if you did have one? Basically asking them if they thought it was important or not. And I would say the majority of the people answered that, yes, they thought it was important. And they thought there would be good involvement, especially in the rural schools, maybe not so much in the urban schools. But in general, they validated my problem that there wasn't enough ag programs in Nebraska schools, which was kind of shocking to me as a mainly agricultural-based state. And so, I just remember asking them, do you have an ag program? Why or why not? And would you find value if we did have that? So I think those are the three big questions that I was asking, depending on if they did or did not have an ag program. And some of them really couldn't answer the why they didn't. And perhaps they just didn't know enough about it themselves, which is probably really likely. So they didn't think it was very important. But I validated my problem that ag education or ag experiences in schools in Nebraska was not what it should be for our state.
Right. Who would you call today, and what would you ask them?
I would probably take a little bit of a different approach outside of the school system. I would probably talk to more extension agents. I did talk to some of them, but I would also probably talk to more of our people just working in the industry, our producers, our ranchers, our cattle feeders, because they get so, like you said, caught up working in their own world. But I would like to know what they thought about what the general public, how they perceive them, how the general public perceives our producers, to see if they think that a problem exists. Because if we're all feeling this, then there's likely something missing there.
Right.
You know?
Right, for sure. So I took this quote from your Instagram. It's so windy and dusty. At the end of the day, if I scratch my head, I find dirt under my fingernails, in the corner of my eyes, grit in my teeth. It feels like I can't breathe. Where did that come from?
What was I writing
Summer
that
drought.
post about? Yeah. So, well, in West Texas, it is flatland.
Yeah.
And it is dry. And there are very few trees.
I drove through there on a U.S. road trip, and I remember in Nebraska, you're like, okay, on I-80, is this road ever going to end? But in Texas, you're like, is this road ever going to end?
I love the Panhandle and its people, but oh my gosh, it is a dry and dusty place, and the wind blows all the time.
Yeah.
And I think I remember probably feeling, I remember wanting rain so badly. That summer. It was so hot. And working at it daily was literally physically exhausting, but also emotionally exhausting, you know? And there was probably a little bit of an emotional drought going on as well. I mean, you're going to be challenged super hard in your graduate programs. I remember not feeling that I was prepared at all for my graduate programs. And so I went through some pretty serious times of just... I was just struggling. It was hard, and it was doing things that I'd never done before and just having to take it one punch at a time and keep rolling with it. So, you know, I, looking back, have loved my graduate program, but I also know that it was really hard as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think part of that was, yes, we were in a literal drought. We are in a literal drought in the Midwest and the Southern Plains and most of the Western United States, but I was also probably going through a little bit of a drought in my mind as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I remember looking at that post, and it was dark red in West Texas and red around it, but red in Nebraska, and I thought it was drier than dry, but that's hard. Well, when you go through a drought like that in your head, how did you get out of that rut and keep going?
I think it's like anybody who works in agriculture you just got to wait. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. You just have to sit it out and wait for rain. I mean, it comes eventually. It may be a while, but it comes eventually, you know. And I do think that's something our producers in agriculture struggle with, you know. There's sometimes the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and there's not much our producers can control about those lows all the time. And sometimes we just can't control our own lows inside our heads. So sometimes you just have to wait it out, and the rain comes eventually. I promise it does.
Right. I know mental health is a problem in not only rural and urban areas, but you don't think about I think about my dad, you know, he's trucking all the time. It's long hours. It's hard. It's so hard, and you're alone a lot.
Yeah.
How have you tried to combat the mental health side in the ag industry?
That is something I was particularly passionate about at one time. I mean, I still am, but when I initially first moved to Texas, I did a little mental health campaign because it was something that I saw was an issue and not being talked about enough and was going through on my own. But essentially this is my first little endeavor outside of college, I was selling these t-shirts that I made that, looking back now, I'm like, those are terrible t-shirts. But people bought them and supported me, and then I donated the money to some rural health or mental health in ag organizations. And I think I did that out of a place of my own mental health was pretty poor at the time, and wanted to make sure that those organizations that were trying to provide resources to our agricultural producers were being funded in the way they needed to be funded, or at least being supported, even if it was however much I made and gave to them. I remember getting a handwritten thank you note from those companies and organizations, thank you not only for this monetary donation, but this support that you're giving us, because that's really important, because that helps them continue to maintain why they're doing what they're doing, you know, because they need that too, aside from the financial motivation that they need to continue to do it.
Yeah. What do you think you would do today If you wanted to support the local farmer and the mental health side, what would you do? If time or money wasn't an issue.
Right. So that's funny you say that, because I mentioned that I am a teaching assistant for the Beef Scholars program here at UNL, and one of their last assignments was to pick an issue in the beef industry and talk about how you would want to solve it. And so one of the topics was mental health and ag. And so the students in that group, they had some really good potential solutions that they talked about. A lot of them talked about community. They talked about, your farmers and ranchers, like sitting at the local co-op in the mornings, like, getting to connect with fellow people who relate to the things that they're going through. And so I think it starts in your own community. I think it's hard to give this nationwide solution to people in agriculture. I think it's something that you have to start small in your own rural communities, and then hopefully it catches fire and expands to your other communities. And so one thing that I would do is, if one day I go back home to my own rural community, I want to make sure that there's collaboration and partnership that exists between that county or that community's producers, whether you're farming or ranching or trucking, whatever role you play in agriculture, making sure that there's a community that exists. And sometimes that takes reaching out to people, because people get so caught up in their own worlds. They're too busy ranching, they're too busy farming to kind of step out of their own comfort zone and go meet people and go talk to people, It's hard. So I think making sure in my own community, if I were to settle down in a rural community right now, making sure that those people felt that they had a place to go and people to talk to that knew what they were going through.
Right. I agree. I love going to our local mini mart in the morning and seeing all the old folks just sitting there having a good time. Love that. I'll probably do it one day. And it's just fun to see them laugh. It's really hard to find laughter in everyday life sometimes. And it's so nice when people are just connecting. Yeah. I think it's so important. It's kind of a lost art.
Yep. And sometimes it's really hard for those people to get off the ranch, even into town, and I think that's really important as well. You don't have to go on a vacation. Just go to town.
Yeah, right.
Just for a little bit, just for your sanity,
Right. But. So you're in your PhD. I don't know when you project to finish or anything like that, but kind of dreaming a little bit, daydreaming. What do you think the next chapter looks like?
So I'm a big daydreamer. I find myself daydreaming a lot, probably more than I should, when I don't want to do something. Yeah. But eventually, so I finished my PhD in 3 years, barring that there's no other barriers in my way. But I think I see myself in 5 to 10 years moving. My longtime boyfriend and I, his family ranches in western Nebraska. And I foresee us moving back there, and he is an only child, so I see us taking over in that respect, but I also see myself having a career as a consulting nutritionist for feedlots, and that does involve a lot of travel. So my ultimate goal is I want to be an independent nutritionist, so working for myself, so that I do have the flexibility to, be on the ranch when I want to be, have kids and raise kids when I want to, and take a break from whatever I'm doing. So I really do foresee us settling down in western Nebraska in our own rural community, and that's probably where we'll be for life. But who knows what's to happen.
I get the chills hearing that, because a lot of people might listen to this and be like, wow, who would want to settle down in western Nebraska and thinks that's like the biggest dream ever. And once you have it, you never want to let go.
For sure.
I get that.
I love it, and you would think that, I'm getting a PhD, so something more big and lofty would be in store for me. But I foresee us just being in western Nebraska, and that's probably where I'll be for the rest of my life. So
I love that. I get the chills. I was looking on your Instagram, and I saw you were sitting on your horse and just admiring the sandhills. What's that feeling like?
It's so, I remember that day that I posted that photo was actually a really frustrating day, because we were moving cattle to a different pasture. It was pairs, so, mamas and babies, and they did not move well. This was a new group of cattle that had been purchased, and so not used to us, we're not used to them, and they weren't used to the new environment that they were in. And I remember that being a really frustrating day. But at the end, like, you get to just sit there and look at what you get to do, and like, not everyone gets to do that kind of stuff. You know, people dream about like, oh, I want to go ride a horse and through the hills, and like, that looks so cool, and it is like, obviously difficult lifestyle, but I do think it is rewarding. And I love nothing more than working in it. So
right. Yeah. It is rewarding. I agree. If the old you could see the new you, what would you say?
I think she would be, one, impressed that she did what she said she was going to do. I always said I was going to either go to vet school or go to grad school, and so I've checked all the boxes that I said I was going to do. I have never been someone who didn't really have a plan for her future, so I think she'd be proud of that. But I think she'd also kind of be surprised at how much she'd changed. You know, I grew up in a very sheltered environment. I grew up in a very big family, a very close family.
How many siblings?
I have 6 siblings.
Oh, wow.
So
cool.
And I love my big family. We're all very close. But I also went to a private school growing up, so I grew up in a very sheltered environment, and a lot of my morals and my values and my beliefs are reflected in that upbringing, which was not a bad upbringing, but once I got out on my own and out of my comfort zone, just how much I changed. I don't think I realized how much I'd changed. And I think she'd be proud of like how she's changed.
You should be. You should be very proud. It's been fun. All right, Kimes or Wrangler jeans?
I'm a Kimes girl. I've never found, like, I always see all these girls wearing like the cowboy cut men's Wrangler jeans. They do not flatter me. They do not look well on me. Although they are more affordable, I cannot bring myself to wear them.
Yeah. No, I had to ask that because I think I saw a post and I thought, I wonder what her favorite is.
So I do love my Kimes. They are a little stressful on the pocketbook, but they hold up really well, and I love them. So
Right. Last couple questions. What's your biggest pet peeves as a business owner?
I think probably just people assuming they know anything and everything about what you do, or how you got to where you are. You know, I've had people tell me that I'm privileged, or tell me how I should do things, or you're lucky, and it's just like, you have no idea what I did to get here, how I grew up. And actually, I would say I did grow up pretty privileged, but what I do now is not a product of that. I wasn't given anything of that. I started my social media account and my following on my own, completely organic, you know? So I think that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves, is just the assumptions that people will make about you, but you kind of just have to live with it, because there's always going to be critics, you know?
What's something that carried you through the tough times?
I think I'm so passionate about this industry, and I think that passion just sometimes gets a little dampened by the outside world and those critics that exist, but I'm always proud of the industry I work in, and always will believe in what we do. So I think that passion and that fire just burns brighter than anything that could dampen it, you know? So just having my why is really important. Believing in what I do has also been really important.
Yeah. Carries you through the tough times, for sure. What do you want to say to the producer out there right now, and what do you want to say to the consumer out there right now?
To the consumer, I would say that I know that it's probably really hard to know who to trust and where to get your information, because you're inundated with it all the time, and anybody can say anything. So I understand that it's really hard to know who to trust and what to believe, especially when you have so many options at the meat counter, that kind of thing. But I want them to trust that their food is safe, especially here in the United States. We have a very safe food supply, and American producers feed their families what they're feeding yours, you know? So you can trust that we wouldn't feed you something we wouldn't feed ourselves. I think that's something they have worries about. To the producer, I would probably say there's a little bit of a hesitancy to want to connect with consumers just because of backlash they might receive. But I would encourage them to take the opportunities that life gives them to actually talk to those people and engage with them on a level beyond that of what your career is and what you do for a living, you know. I think you'd find you have a lot more in common with those people than you think you do, you know. We all have families, we all have likes, we all have dislikes. At the end of the day, we're all human beings who just want to be connected with, you know.
That's right. So yeah. I appreciate hearing that, because growing up on a feed to finish operation, that's just what you grow up with. And then when you get to college and you have vegans and vegetarians and all of that, it's frustrating for me, and it's hard because I don't understand them and they don't understand me. But there's no right or wrong. And
at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all just want to be connected with and loved. So aside from dietary choices or the way we make our living, you know, just connecting on that level, I think is really important.
What's your favorite Angler pillar?
I would probably say grit. It probably applies to most of my life, through not only what I have to do on social media, in my business, getting through my graduate programs. You know, it takes a lot of pushing through, even when it gets super, super challenging. So, and it will apply to my life when someday, you know, we're ranching in western Nebraska and life gets hard. Yeah.
So is your grandpa still here?
He's not. He died when I was 4 years old.
Okay. What do you think, what conversation would you have with him today if you could have one?
I feel like I really missed out on getting to know my grandpa just because he was a cattle feeder, you know. So that was really my only direct tie to agriculture. I think he would be super proud. My grandma tells me that all the time. Anytime I talk to her, she goes, well, she's 99. She's almost 100 years old, and she will say, I just can't believe you go and you feed cattle. Like, she's amazing to her. Yeah. Like, it's not something she would have ever done, you know? And I think I really missed out on that relationship with my grandpa, but I think he would be really proud.
I think so, too. How can the angler community support you going forward?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram. I recently changed my name. I have to get used to my name change. It was Agacknowledged, but I recently changed it because I wanted my my brand to be my name. So now it's just Anna M. Kobza, I'm pretty sure, if I remember right. I really recently changed it. I had to find a name that wasn't already taken, and that was the only option for my name, apparently. So I had to include my middle initial in there. But I think just, continue to exist here. Like, it's incredible, like, what you guys have here. Like, the resources, the facilities. Like, we didn't have that, but that didn't really, I would say, matter. But, this is just great to nurture that, like, entrepreneurial spirit, like what you guys have. So continue to do it.
Yeah. Well, we're so thankful to have you on the podcast today. I've enjoyed, watching you from afar, but also we went to college together and we never had the chance to truly connect, and I never got to know your heart that deep. So I've really appreciated getting to know you more today, and I can't wait for other entrepreneurs out there who are struggling and they need the grit and they need to be carried through the tough times, because man, it's hard, and to learn how to communicate with people. You do it so well, and you're amazing with your words. So if more people in this world can take that from you, I think the world will be a better place. So I'm so thankful to have you on the podcast today. Maybe we'll have to do it again in the future. Please come in the angler space more. The students love you, so we're excited. But thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.